"We're not paying for this show," Mom announced, her voice slicing through the room like glass. Dad leaned back, smirking, arms folded across his chest. "Find someone who can afford you," he added, almost as if he enjoyed twisting the knife. Their words didn't just land, they echoed, burned, seared into the quiet corners of my heart. For a moment it felt like the walls were closing in. The air shifted. And suddenly, my own wedding felt like a crime I had dared to commit. "Hi everyone, my name is Amara. And if you're listening, stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about silence that turned into fire. About a daughter they thought they could break." I remember standing there, clutching the fabric of my dress, the lace digging into my palms. My fiancé's face blurred in the background, not with shame, not with anger, but with a hollow silence that hurt just as much. The laughter of my cousins lingered down the hallway, muffled, careless, like my pain was entertainment. Me. I just whispered 2 words, barely louder than the crack of my breaking chest. "Understood." No screaming. No begging. Just silence. Because silence has its own kind of power. That night I sat on my bed in the half-dark, scrolling through contracts, bills, numbers. My mother thought canceling would humiliate me. My father thought dismissing me would bury me. But by dawn the first call didn't go to me. It went to them. The venue manager, his voice sharp with fury, was screaming down the phone. "Why did the owner cancel your daughter's refund?" And that was only the beginning. If this ever happened to you, say, same in the comments. The house was still when the scream came through the phone. The kind of clipped, furious voice you only hear from someone who thinks they've been wronged by a rule they didn't bother to read. "Why did the owner cancel your daughter's refund?" the venue manager demanded, every word punched clean through the speaker. I watched Mom's face tighten, watched Dad reach for the volume as if control could be turned up like a dial. My name was a splinter on her tongue. "What do you mean cancelled?" Mom fired back. "We were guaranteed." "No," he cut in. "You were promised a review. Not a refund. And now the contract has been amended." Dad's eyes slid to me. The look said, "Daughter, what did you do?" My heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. Funny how calm finds you once the worst thing has been said out loud. I had moved while they slept. At dawn, the city was paper-thin and gray, the kind of quiet that makes crisp decisions feel inevitable. I walked up the venue's stone steps with a folder under my arm and the owner's number already ringing. Inside, the lobby smelled of lemon polish. Chandeliers held their breath. The owner, Mr. K, had the kind of face you remember not for features but for steadiness. He'd heard my last name and almost apologized before I even spoke. "Your parents called late," he said. They were adamant. "I'm not here to beg," I told him, placing the folder on his desk. "I'm here to make today easier than yesterday." The folder held 3 things. The clause in their contract that allowed assignment of booking to a new host with owner approval. A 1-page addendum I'd already drafted, transferring the event from wedding reception to Founders Fellowship Gala. And a cashier's check that covered the difference between my reduced headcount and his peak rate Saturday fee. My name sat on the addendum beside a simple LC. Quiet Hour Collective. "You'll keep the date," I said. "Keep the staff, the band, the menu, pared down, not cancelled. You'll lose the chaos of a chargeback and gain a partner who doesn't scream into phones. In return, you approve the assignment and void any pending refund requests tied to the old host. Clean. No drama." He stared at the page, then at me. A slow nod. A pen uncapped. Back in my parents' kitchen, the manager continued, now angrier because he had fewer places to throw his anger. "The deposit is locked to the addendum holder," he was saying. "The event remains on the calendar. If you have complaints, take it up with the person listed as host." Silence stretched, a violin string pulled to a high note. Mom lowered the phone. "You," she said to me, almost whispering. "You did this." I didn't flinch. "Last night you called my life a show," I said softly. "Today it's a gala with scholarships attached. Same walls, different reason." Dad laughed once, not from humor but from disbelief curdling into insult. "You think you can embarrass us with your little stunt?" I slipped the signed addendum from my folder and placed it on the table like a mirror. Their reflections sat inside the ink. 2 people who thought control came from shutting a door. They didn't see the windows. "Embarrassment," I said, "is optional. Attendance is not." Mom's phone buzzed again. A new email, the venue's confirmation. Her eyes flicked across the line that mattered. Event host, Quiet Hour Collective, Amara. My fiancé texted at that exact second. Your parents called me. They want the ring back. I stared at the message, then at the simple gold circle on my finger. It felt heavier than truth. I slid it off and set it beside the addendum. Keep the ring, I typed back. I'm keeping the date. And just like that, the flowers, the lights, the music remained. Only the story changed. The stage they tried to take away had become mine. Tomorrow the doors would open to a different kind of guest list. And somewhere between the first speech and the last violin, I planned to reveal one detail I hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Mr. K. I wasn't just hosting the gala. I was funding it. The night before the date, my room was silent except for the scratching of my pen against thick stationery. A dozen envelopes lay fanned out across the table, each one addressed not to family or friends, but to names my parents couldn't stand in the same room with: community leaders, scholarship applicants, professors, even the women's shelter that once turned Mom away when she demanded they handle a distant cousin's shame. I sealed each letter, slid them into a neat stack, and thought of my dress hanging by the door. It would not be worn as a bride's gown. It would be worn as armor. The next morning I walked into the venue. The chandeliers dripped with light. The air smelled of orchids and polished marble. The staff, the same ones who were meant to serve champagne to relatives, stood ready with clipboards and fresh place cards. Only now the names weren't theirs. They were mine. Guests filed in one by one. A professor hugged me, eyes misted. You didn't tell me you'd fund 3 full scholarships. This is extraordinary. A young woman in a plain dress whispered, Miss Amara, I never thought I'd step inside a hall like this. Thank you. And every time I just smiled. Because every thank you was a hammer blow against the silence my parents had chained me with. At the far end of the hall I saw them, Mom and Dad. They hadn't been invited, but pride makes fools bold. They marched in as if they owned the floor. My mother's earrings caught the light like daggers. My father's jaw flexed, already tightening into a smirk that felt rehearsed. Still parading your little show? Mom sneered, her words slick and venomous. I lifted the microphone, steady, my voice soft but heavy enough to still the room. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today, not for a wedding but for something greater. Today this hall belongs to the Quiet Hour Collective. Every dollar my parents tried to erase has been redirected to new beginnings, to futures that deserve more than silence. Gasps echoed across the room. The professor clapped first. Then the students. Then the shelter's director. Applause grew like a storm, filling the chandeliers with sound. Mom's face paled. Dad leaned forward, teeth gritted. You'll regret this, he hissed low enough for only me to hear. But regret wasn't mine to carry anymore. Because just then the venue owner himself approached the stage. He adjusted the microphone. His voice, calm but commanding, rolled across the hall. For the record, this event is under Ms. Amara's name. The contract is sealed. Any previous requests, refunds, cancellations, objections, are void. And anyone causing disruption will be escorted out. His eyes slid toward my parents. The crowd followed his gaze. Mom's hand tightened on Dad's arm. For the first time their smirks faltered. And I realized, the show they tried to cancel had only just begun. The curtain was up and the next act was mine to write. They didn't leave. Of course they didn't. Pride roots itself too deep in people like them. Instead they slid into chairs near the back, arms crossed, their presence a shadow in a room glowing with gratitude. I moved forward with the program. The first scholarship recipient stepped onto the stage. A young man with nervous hands and eyes that refused to lift from the floor. I handed him the microphone. His voice cracked as he spoke about being the first in his family to attend university, about nights he worked double shifts so his younger sister could eat. The room fell silent, then roared with applause. I glanced toward the back. Mom's lips were pressed into a thin line. Dad stared straight ahead, jaw rigid. This wasn't their script and they hated it. The gala flowed on. Speeches, music, promises carved into the air. With each one my parents shrank smaller, their control slipping further from their grasp. I wore the dress they once mocked as too much lace for too little status. Under the lights, it shimmered not as a bride's gown, but as a banner of defiance. Then came the moment I had prepared for. I walked back to the podium, lifted the final envelope and let my voice steady itself. Tonight we close with something I've kept quiet until now. This isn't just a gala. It's a fund, a permanent endowment. Gasps spread like ripples. Every cent my parents withheld, every dollar they tried to bury, has been doubled. And now it belongs here. The venue erupted. Cheers, applause, tears. I watched the joy ripple across faces of strangers who in this moment felt like family. And then silence. Heavy, expectant silence, the kind that waits for one final note. I leaned closer to the mic, eyes locking on Mom and Dad. For those asking how this was possible, let's just say the refund you tried to claim never reached your account. It was redirected. Permanently. The crowd turned, eyes darting toward them. Whispers. Shifting chairs. Mom's face flushed crimson. Dad shot up, fists clenched at his sides. But before he could speak, the professor from earlier rose to his feet and began to clap. Slow, deliberate, echoing. One by one the entire hall followed. My parents stood in a storm of applause not meant for them. And for the first time in my life I didn't look away. The applause thundered, rising and rising until it drowned even the pounding in my chest. For a moment I let the sound wash over me. It was more than clapping, it was proof. Proof that my story no longer belonged to the whispers of a family that tried to shrink me. Mom yanked at Dad's sleeve, her voice cutting beneath the noise. Sit down before you humiliate us further. But Dad's pride was fire. It only grew hotter in shame. He barked, this is theft. She stole from us. The crowd hushed, but not in his favor. All eyes turned to him, but instead of respect there was pity, and then contempt. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply said into the microphone, theft is when you take what isn't yours. Contribution is when you invest in futures. And tonight, futures are all that matter. The venue owner stepped forward again, calm but firm. Sir, any further disruption and you'll be escorted out. Remember, your daughter is the legal contract holder here. Every transaction was authorized. Dad froze. He wasn't used to being told no. Not at home, not in business, and certainly not in public. His fists unclenched slowly, like a man realizing for the first time that the world didn't bend at his command. The program resumed, but tension lingered in the corners like smoke. My parents stayed seated, simmering, while the night unfolded into something larger than any wedding could have been. When the final violin note faded, I walked off stage into a sea of strangers who hugged me like family. You changed my daughter's life. You gave me hope again. You don't know what this means to us. Their words stitched over wounds I thought would never close. But when I looked past them, I caught sight of my fiancé standing near the door, the gold ring still in his hand. He didn't wear shame or anger, just hesitation, like a man who realized too late he had bet on the wrong side. I didn't move toward him. Not even a step. Because in that moment, surrounded by applause and gratitude, I understood something. I didn't need saving. I was the salvation. He lingered by the door, my ex-fiancé, clutching that ring like it was a ticket back into my story. His eyes searched for mine, pleading without words. But I didn't give him the gift of recognition. Not anymore. Instead, I turned toward the line of guests waiting to thank me. A grandmother pressed my hands into hers and whispered, "You gave my grandson a future. I will pray for you every day." Her touch was light, but it carried more warmth than my parents had given me in years. Behind her, the director of the shelter stepped forward. She hugged me tightly, then leaned close enough for only me to hear. "I remember when your mother told us to handle family business quietly. Tonight you handled it with grace." Her words cracked something open in me, not pain but release. The truth was no longer hidden. Everyone could see it. And my parents couldn't bury it with silence this time. At the back, Dad's jaw was rigid, Mom's earrings trembling as she shook with fury. Their faces were masks, but masks slip when the light gets too bright. They looked small now, dwarfed by the applause meant for those who had once been invisible. The gala ended with one last note, a violinist pulling the bow slow, a sound like a curtain closing. Guests filed out, murmuring gratitude, pressing folded letters of thanks into my hand. And when the hall finally emptied, I stood alone beneath the chandeliers, staring at the gold ring still left on a nearby table. My ex had placed it there before leaving, quietly, as if returning an object no longer of value. I touched it once, then left it where it lay. That circle had no hold on me anymore. As I gathered the last of the letters, the venue owner approached. "Miss Amara," he said, voice steady, "I've hosted hundreds of weddings here. But tonight, this mattered. You turned a cancellation into something unforgettable." I nodded, my chest rising with a breath that felt lighter than it had in years. "It wasn't about revenge," I said softly. "It was about rewriting the ending." But deep down I knew revenge had happened anyway. And its echo was only just beginning. The echo reached further than I expected. By morning, photos of the gala flooded social media. Students in borrowed suits smiling beneath chandeliers, mothers weeping with joy, my dress glimmering not as a bride's gown but as a banner of defiance. The headline was everywhere. "Bride turns cancelled wedding into scholarship gala." Messages poured in. Former classmates, colleagues, even strangers wrote, "You gave us hope. You proved family doesn't define you, choice does." But in my parents' world, the narrative twisted into something bitter. They called relatives first, spinning lies. She embarrassed us in public. She stole our money. She ruined everything. Yet for once the story didn't bend their way. The relatives had seen the coverage, had read the truth printed plainly. One aunt messaged me quietly, "I never had the courage to stand up to them. Watching you, it was like watching all of us finally breathe." At their house, Dad slammed doors while Mom ranted about betrayal. But it was futile. Their control had slipped. And control once lost doesn't return, it shatters. Days later I walked into a cafe for a meeting. The professor I'd funded was there, waiting with 2 board members from the university. They offered something I hadn't imagined, a permanent partnership. My little LLC, Quiet Hour Collective, would be recognized as a founding donor. My name carved into stone. As I shook their hands, I caught a reflection in the cafe window, my own eyes steady and unflinching. I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. That night I returned home to find a letter slid under my door. My mother's handwriting sharp as ever. "You humiliated us. Return what's ours and we'll forgive you." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer with the others. Letters filled with gratitude, lives changed, futures rewritten. And for the first time her words carried no weight. Because the truth was simple. What they thought was theirs had become everyone's. And forgiveness? That was never mine to beg for. The only thing left now was closure, and it was already walking toward me one step at a time. Closure arrived not with fire but with silence. A week later I stood again at the venue, this time for a press interview. The chandeliers sparkled just as they had before, but the room felt different, lighter. My parents were nowhere to be found, though I heard whispers they had tried to call the venue owner, begging him to retract his support. He hadn't even entertained the idea. The journalist asked, "What do you hope your parents take from this?" I paused. The answer wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was truth. I hope they learn that children are not shows to be cancelled when inconvenient. We are lives. And lives don't disappear because someone refuses to pay. The article went viral. Donations doubled. Quiet Hour Collective became not just a name on paper, but a movement people wanted to stand behind. Then one quiet evening I received another call, this time not from the venue but from the bank. My parents had tried to contest the redirected funds. The bank official's voice was almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, but the contracts and transfers are airtight. There's nothing they can reclaim." I thanked him, hung up, and let the silence settle. That silence was sweeter than any applause. It was justice, poetic and patient. Weeks later I visited the university campus. A wall plaque had been installed, Quiet Hour Collective Endowment, established by Amara. Students gathered beneath it, taking photos, smiling. One turned to me and said, "Because of you I get to study medicine. My mother calls you my guardian." Guardian. Not daughter. Not cast off. Guardian. As I walked away my phone buzzed with another message from Mom. I didn't open it. Some words don't need to be read. I stepped into the evening air, the sky stretched wide and endless, and for the first time I felt weightless. They had tried to cancel my wedding. But all they did was give birth to my legacy. And with that thought the story ended, not with bitterness, not with loss, but with freedom.